Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakurotam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi stuve patanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam kartra sutrasya bhashyasya kramad vivaranasya cha. We were discussing the 17th sutra, I think, that deals with the Samprajñāta Samadhi, the first stage. It is secondary Samadhi that we discussed. That is Vitarka Vichara Ananda Asmita Anugamat Samprajñātaha. That is, Samprajñāta Samadhi is that kind of Samadhi which is accompanied by Vitarka, reasoning, Vichara, discerning. Of course, we discussed this. It is much more than that. Ananda and Asmita. Vitarka, in actual life, it implies the beginning of our spiritual journey, stepping into the journey of what Yoga Sutra calls the counter evolution or reverse evolution. What it means is very simple. Through evolution, we have come to a very low status of identifying ourselves with the material world, with everything that attracts our attention, and we identify. When we see something, we are attracted. When we hear something, we are attracted. Like that, all the five senses dragging the mind to different sense objects, which actually create a kind of prison wall, and we start identifying ourselves with everything that is coming and going, this momentary, phenomenal world of objects. This is a very, very low status. From here, we have to reverse a journey. We have descended and reached the rock bottom. Now we have to start ascending. It is counter evolution or reverse evolution. How do we do that? First, we must think, what is that which attracts my mind? And why does my mind get attracted towards these external things? When a small problem arises, we get lost. We are shocked, we become concerned and worried, and when a momentary gain happens, then we are overjoyed. So we are caught by this transient world of objects. So slowly we have to first practice taking our mind away from the world of objects, and then we should analyze our own mind. And as we take ascending steps, we will come to realize that our mind itself is an evolute of this cosmic intelligence. It's called Mahatattvam in the evolutionary ladder of Prakriti. And then finally, we start identifying ourselves with the source of all this evolutionary process, Prakriti. In fact, in the coming sutras, we will discuss about two types of yogis, and this is a very important thing. Maybe I can prepare you for this at this stage itself. 19th sutra tells you, which we are going to discuss maybe not in this session, Bhava Pratyayo Videha Prakritilayanam. That's a very interesting sutra. Actually, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras discuss two types of yogas, two types of samadhis, samprajnata samadhi and asamprajnata samadhi. And it also discusses two types of yogis. The first type of yogis, those who have not fully liberated, those who have not fully attained the highest spiritual enlightenment, those who are attracted by some special powers, special achievements. So they are called Videhas or Prakriti Leena Purushas. That is an important term. We will discuss this when we discuss 19th, 20th Sutras and the coming Sutras. Two types of yogis are mentioned. It is possible, once you read the Yoga Sutras in simple translation, we may not be able to somehow connect that information into our everyday world of knowledge and intelligence. We may think we are reading a book on fantasy. We are reading something like, that terrible movie that show in the airplane when you travel from one place to another place, the Corn Island and things like that. A 20,000 feet tall, huge monkey standing in the middle of the ocean and catching airplanes and breaking them into pieces. Absolutely, even as a fiction, it is sufficiently ridiculous. Now, when you read some of this Yoga Sutra literature, and when you hear these, you may suddenly think it is some kind of a fantasy, but it is not. So we will discuss that. The first type of yogis is called Prakriti Leena Purushas or Videhas, those who have reached by this reverse evolution, those who have identified themselves with the cosmic intelligence, and even gone beyond that, those who have identified themselves with Prakriti, the source of all evolution. Now, this is one category of yogis who are actually inferior in status. That's because they are still attracted towards these powers or siddhis, vibhudis that are discussed in the third chapter of the standard textbook. That is Samadhi, Sadhana, Vibhudi. That's the third pada. The great powers are discussed. Powers that naturally come to a person who practices Ashtanga Yoga. Now, our commentators tell you that actually these people can very easily be understood. Suppose you find some people born in this world with some exceptional powers of mind. Of course, having some great qualities also. In Hindu Puranic literature, identifies them with the celestial beings as Devas and Devadas, celestial beings living in the higher planes of existence. In the other religious traditions, they may say angels and so on. Anyway, they are endowed with some special powers, faculties that we normally do not associate with among ordinary human beings. But if you look at the humanity in general, you find people, sometimes from time to time, you find people born with some exceptional powers of mind and intellect. And also possessing some higher qualities like yamas and niyamas, some spiritual qualities, self-restraint, contentment, and also exercising special powers of mind and intellect. So some of our commentators relate these Prakriti Leena Purushas, the inferior type of yogis, to these celestial beings. Why are they inferior? Because they have not completely overcome their desire for exceptional powers and faculties. They are born again and again. They are not liberated from this cycle of life and death. They are bound by their karmas, and they are still within the clutches of the karmic cycles, They are born, again they do many great things, they achieve great powers, and they die, again they are reborn. So they continue to be within this karmic cycle, transmigratory cycle. This is one sort of yogis. The other type of yogis are mentioned. They are actually called real yogis. I mean those who have liberated, those who attain Kaivalya. That's the 4th chapter, Kaivalya chapter. They have reached complete and total liberation. Those who have transcended the previous stage, the Prakriti-Lina Purusha stage. Prakriti-Lina Purushas, the secondary type of yogis, they are still using their Ashtasiddhis, the Vibhudis, they are not fully liberated. But the later ones, those who have attained liberation, they have reached Kaivalya, they are not born again. This will be discussed in the coming sutras, maybe not today, but in the coming days. Now, why it is relevant for us to remember this sutra here? The importance is that when a yoga practitioner, when he goes through this reverse evolution through vitarka, he may reach a stage and he may reach this samprajnata samadhi. And then he may attain these powers, but he'll be subjected to karmic cycles. Vichara, that's again the subtle aspects of what we already discussed in Vitarka. Ananda, this Manomaya Kosha, that is, they are happy, they are unhappy, they are still gone beyond that. Asmita, awareness, they have attained this cosmic awareness. Now, this is one type of samadhi, that is samprajnata samadhi that we discussed. What we are now going to discuss is asamprajnata samadhi, that is the 18th verse, 18th sutra. Virama pratyaya abhyasa samskara seshaha anyaha. This is the sutra. The sutra is analyzed very carefully by Vyasa in his commentary. So, according to Vyasa, this sutra, it should be properly analyzed. Virama pratyaya abhyasa purvaka, that is one. It's actually an adjective. Adjective which modifies, which qualifies, which explains the noun. The noun here is actually a pronoun. Anya means the other one. Anya means, what is the other? The other samadhi. What is the other samadhi? Asamprajnata samadhi. Because we already discussed samprajnata samadhi in the previous sutras. Now the other, anya, the other samadhi is discussed in the 18th sutra. And that other samadhi, what is the other samadhi? Virama pratyaya abhyasa purvaha. That is one important element of it. Virama, it means a person in his, all the vrittis, all the samskaras, all the impressions, all tendencies have completely ceased. That is Virama Pratyaya. So, Sagala Vrittinam Uparamaha, the Vajaspati Misra writes in his commentary, means all vrittis have completely ceased to exist. Now, in English language, when we explain this, there is a problem because normally in many books they use the same word, and that's because that's a problem of language when you interpret an alien philosophy in one particular language, tendencies, impressions, and so on. Very often vrittis are mentioned here. Vrittis, let us say, vrittis are the impressions that the first stage of impression. These vrittis become strong and established, they become samskaras. So, in a person who has successfully overcome, transcended all vrittis. In other words, this particular asampragnata samadhi is preceded by total cessation of all vrittis. This asampragnata samadhi is sometimes called nirbija samadhi. You find in books, you can find it nirbija samadhi sometimes used here in many books. Nirbija actually means, in the Vyasa's commentary also uses the word nirbija, that we'll discuss later. So a person who has practiced this virama pratyabhyasa means it's paravairagyam. Paravairagyam means the highest vairagyam. We already discussed this in the previous sutra. What is paravairagyam? That is we have to remember 15th sutra discusses aparavairagyam, drishta anusabhiga vishaya vidrishnasya vashikara samjna vairagyam. That is the one kind of vairagyam in which a person doesn't have any attraction, who has total dispassion for any kind of earthly or heavenly cravings or pleasures. That is aparavairagyam, the secondary, the inferior kind of dispassion. The supreme dispassion is tat param purushakhyadehe gunavaitrushnim. That vairagya which is the nature of total non-attachment to the gunas. That means in a person where in whose mind all the impressions, samskaras, tendencies, attractions all have become almost like burnt seeds. If those seeds fall even on fertile soil, it will not sprout. Somebody who has reached a higher level of dispassion is completely overcome the influence of the lower desires of his mind. And that is the supreme renunciation or supreme dispassion. Now, this higher samadhi, asampragnata samadhi or nirbija samadhi, is preceded by the constant practice of this supreme dispassion, that is paravairagyam. So that's the meaning of the first part of the sutra. Samskara seshaha anyaha. It means in such a person, the samskara or the impressions remain only in their latent or potential form. They never manifest. I made this comparison earlier. Those who have reached only the preliminary stage of dispassion, by reading books, practicing yama-niyamas, sometimes practicing, contemplation. So many people can do that. Anyone can practice this. When we feed our mind with good intellectual, spiritual, emotional food, our mind naturally is elevated. Our desires, our thoughts, our objectives in life also become more and more sublime, more and more spiritual. At that stage, one is able to transcend all negativity. That's a popular term common these days, so I'm using that term. So it may help many people to connect with what we are talking about. There are many things in our mind that we know to be wrong, to be undesirable. But when we practice some of these great disciplines, we are able to restrain them completely so that they will not create problems for us or for others. But if such persons happen to live in tempting situations and circumstances, he may lose his balance. He can get trapped. That stage is aparavairagya, means the preliminary stage of dispassion. Then what about the higher dispassion, paravairagyam? That's a stage where you have got with you all the samskaras, but they have become like burned seeds. Seeds, if you fry in oil or burn or cook, or maybe powder into, or make it dissolve in water, that seeds are not going to sprout, even if you put those burnt seeds or cooked, fried seeds in fertile soil. So, at that stage, one is completely able to transcend the influence of negativity. So that's why Vyasa writes here, so in such a person, samskara seshva, such a person, only in the potential form remains samskara, but those samskaras will not be a problem for him. Anyaha. Now here Vyasa's commentary. Sarvavritti pratyastha samaye samskara sesho nirodhas chittasya samadhihi nirodhaha chittasya samadhihi asamprajnataha. Sarva vritti pratyastha samaye means all vrittis, all the negative samskaras. In fact, at the highest stage of asamprajnata samadhi, negative and positive samskaras are all gone. Because in a person who is able to transcend negative samskaras, negative impressions, there is some possibility or chance of his maybe unconsciously imbibing negative samskaras, though he is always struggling to remain in a positive mood. But he has to work hard for that. So there is always a remote possibility of his maybe inadvertently falling into the clutches of negative samskaras. So at the highest level, both positive and negative samskaras are completely transcended. So such a state is called samskara sesha. Nirodha chittasya samadhi. That is called asamprajnata samadhi. In other words, in the higher samadhi level, you actually attained nirodha samadhi, means you are completely transcended the influence of all samskaras, all vrittis, all tendencies. Tasya param vairagyam upayaka. Now, for this asamprajnata samadhi, for this, what normally when we read in books on yoga studio, they will teach you samadhi, etc. It is a very wonderful idea, no doubt. But what they are actually talking about is they teach you concentration. That's good actually. That is very good. But Patanjali here is talking about something much higher. You reach a stage where you are completely liberated from even a remote possibility of being born again. You become one with the highest spiritual reality. So such persons will not worry that he won't be born again. People who are worried, if I cannot take birth again, that's a big problem. So rebirth itself is a burden, is something undesirable. That is an important element of this dispassion or renunciation. Remember, it's a very important thing. Of course, that is one important aspect of these Hindu Oriental religious traditions, in which rebirth, being as a human being in this wonderful world where we can have all the wonderful things, it itself is a problem, is a state of imperfection. It is not the highest state. So, in fact, that conviction is the mother of higher evolution. This is something very interesting, very important for us to remember. I think that's an important dividing line between the Abrahamic and non-Abrahamic views, perspectives of birth and life. And this is something very common you find in most of these religious traditions which have an Oriental origin, like Hinduism, Buddhism, and all other umbrella religions which belong to it. I mean, whether Jainism, Sikhism, and so on. In all these traditions, people consider living in this world, being born in this world, even be born in the richest family, become president or prime minister, whatever you want, biggest corporate CEO. That itself is not the highest state. It is an inferior status. Now, to look upon that as an inferior status, you have to be a Buddha only. You have to be nothing less than a Buddha. Because only Buddha can look upon this as something undesirable. That's why he gave up everything. One night he left his palace and walked to 1200 miles and sat under a tree. Ihasane sushudu me shariram tugasti mamsam cha vilayam cha yatuhu aprapya siddhim behu janma durlabham naivasanat kayamadas chalishyade. Buddha, these are the words in which the biographer describes what was going on in Buddha's mind as he sat under the tree to meditate. And this man, he had no problem. Yeah, he was a prince. He would soon be proclaimed the next emperor. He was the heir apparent. He was the eldest son, the only son of his father, who was the king of a kingdom, and he was brought up in luxurious circumstances. He did not know anything about the darker side of human life. Such a man thought, it's absolutely undesirable. I want something better. And what was the better that he was looking for? He dressed himself as a mendicant. In modern times, you can say a homeless man. Walked 1200 miles. And he was going in search of something of which he was not sure. He thought it was some kind of an enlightenment, because he saw something special on the face of a monk whom he saw as he was traveling in the streets of Lumbini, the capital city of his kingdom. And he saw a dead man being taken to the cremation ground. He saw a sick man, an old man. And then he saw a monk, and that monk's face was something and he wanted to be like that monk. Totally no problem, no misery, nothing. And he wanted to be like that. Now, is it possible for every human being to have a feeling of total disregard for things that normal human beings work hard their whole life? Well, that is paravairagyam, to be very frank. That's why this highest samadhi is preceded by that kind of paravairagya, virama pratyaya abhyasa purvaha. Okay, now, tasya param vairagyam upayah. So, to reach this highest asamprajnata samadhi, paravairagyam, the supreme dispassion, is upaya, means the means. You have to practice that, this highest sense of renunciation or dispassion. Then only you can reach this highest asamprajnata samadhi. In other words, total disregard for the most enjoyable earthly life, having received it, is paravairagyam. Actually, Vyasa himself, when he describes parinama dukkha in the sadhana pada, parinama tapa samskara dukkaihi gunavrutti visheshacha dukkhameva sarvam vivekinaha. It's a famous sutra. It comes the 15th sutra of sadhana pada. In that sutra, Vyasa raised this parinama dukkha. Parinama dukkha is this kind of dukkha, this kind of dispassion that Buddha felt for his kingdom, which he renounced. It is possible, yoginameva krishnadi, it happens only to yogi, it happens only to a highly evolved person. That is the idea behind. So, Vyasa here writes, Tasya param vairagyam upayaha. Then he says something different, that is, this part of Bhashya is well known, so I thought maybe I can discuss this in brief at least. Salambano hi abhyasaha tasadhanaya na kalpade iti. So Vyasa writes here. Now he says, any kind of samadhi with a support, it is salambana means with support, with an object to meditate, like samprajnana samadhi that we discussed earlier. It is not conducive to this kind of asamprajnana samadhi. That means any kind of aparavairagya or secondary renunciation, dispassion, is not conducive for attaining this supreme asamprajnana samadhi. So, of course, in fact, great commentators like Vijnana Bhikshu. Vijnana Bhikshu, you should remember, we should not confuse Vijnana Bhikshu, the commentator of Yoga Sutras, who wrote his commentary based on Vyasa's commentary. We should not confuse him with Vijnana Bhikshu of Buddhist tradition, who was actually a Mahayana Buddhist. But he was also well known as a great practitioner of yoga, because he belonged to the Yogacara tradition. So Yogacara Buddhists were great practitioners of this yoga, meditation, yama, niyama, all these great spiritual disciplines. So in that book, Vijnana Bhikshu talks about some of these practices. So, many of them talk about bhakti. If you meditate on a deity, if you meditate on some higher spiritual persons, then it will help you to attain this total transcendence of negativity, and eventually you can evolve to the next stage of samadhi. So one important point to remember is, in this context, when you read yoga books and Sankhya books, you should remember, Sankhya philosophy doesn't find any need for a god. That's something very interesting. Sankhya philosophers will tell you that Prakriti itself is enough to explain the mystery of creation. That's something very interesting. Prakriti, I must remind you, Prakriti here doesn't mean nature. Nature is the word into which the Sanskrit word Prakriti is translated. But nature here means the supreme source of evolution of everything in nature. That is the real meaning of, including human beings, the senses, the mind, all these are evolutes of Prakriti. So, according to Sankhya philosophers, actually we don't need a god. We can find the whole mystery of creation explained in this concept of Prakriti itself. But according to yoga philosophers, they will tell you that actually God is a reality. So that's why they talked about one supreme divine person, who is Saguna Sakara deity, who is the creator of the world, supreme intelligence. Yoga philosophers do admit the reality of a God or Ishvara. But Sankhya philosophers normally do not accept the role of a God. They say the God you're talking about is only a liberated soul. That's all. One of the Prakriti Lina Purushas. That's their view. We have to remember in this context, the higher relevance of Yoga Sutras will become clear only in the light of Vedanta, which I am going to discuss after this. So, Salambano hi abhyasaha tas sadhanaya nagalpade virama pratyo nirvastuka alambani kriyade. So what happens is, when you practice this virama pratyaya means here the cause, karana. Virama here means uparama, means cessation of all vrittis and tendencies. When this happens, you don't have a single object on which you are meditating. That such a arthashunyaka, no object of contemplation. Tat abhyasa purvam chittam niralambanam abhava praptam iva bhavati iti esha nirbijaha samadhihi asamprajnataha. This is Vyasa's commentary. What Vyasa says is very simple. I shall try to explain. Tat abhyasa purvam chittam niralambanam abhava praptam iva. Now, when a spiritual seeker who have already reached Samprajnata Samadhi, when he is progressing towards Asamprajnata Samadhi, the higher Samadhi, then what he does is, he transcends the need to concentrate upon an object. Rather, he can concentrate on his own mind, his own chittam. And the chittam itself becomes niralambanam. It doesn't require any other support. And then what happens is, abhava praptam, he transcends his own mind and he feels as if the mind is not existing. Actually, these are the ideas which later on entered Buddhism and which paved the foundation for this mindfulness, all these ideas which later sprang up in Buddhist tradition. So transcending our mind, going beyond our own mind, which is an important principle in Vedanta also. When we actually transcend our mind, what is happening is, we transcend our lower identities. We go beyond our lower identities. Actually, it's a very wonderful thing. Even for as a spiritual practice, even in some kind of a psychological counseling as they do, you think you empty your mind, think as if you don't have a mind. Of course, that is not the way to do that, and you are not going to transcend the mind that way. Only you get a little relaxation. People normally sit in an easy chair, some soothing music, maybe something very cool atmosphere, and then you go beyond your mind. That is wonderful. That may help you to get some relaxation. There's no doubt about it. But there's a deep philosophical truth behind this. If we can transcend our mind, all problems will be over. Now, what is the meaning of transcending the mind? The meaning of transcending the mind is going beyond our lower identities. In our everyday life, we identify ourselves with many of these lower levels of evolution. So, the evolutionary ladder, I don't have a blackboard here to present, but it may be wonderful for you to remember. At the highest level, Prakriti, the source of our evolution. Then you are coming down to the lowest levels, lower. Below that, Mahatattva, cosmic intelligence. Below that, Ahankara or Asmita. That means awareness. I am this, I am that, etc. And below that, this awareness, this Asmita, the Ahankara has got 3 dimensions. Ahankara, Asmita, awareness, whatever you may call it. It has got 3 dimensions. Sattvika, the more serene, the more pure, the more refined. From that, mind evolves. And then Tamasika and Rajasika. From these, our senses evolve. And the Tamasika Ahankara, Tanmatras, and the external world objects evolve. Now we have reached the rock bottom. That's why we identify ourselves. When we see something, we identify ourselves as the person who sees that object. That's why we get attracted to something that is visual. Or we hear something, we get attracted to that sound. That is also part of this lower evolutes. From here, we have to reverse the journey. back to our own home. First we should reach Prakriti and then Purusha. Those who are reached in their reverse evolution up to Prakriti, they call Prakriti Leena Purushas. They are evolved. They still have attraction for some special powers. Sometimes you find in the world people you may call geniuses. But there are two types of geniuses. There are some geniuses, people with supernatural abilities, but also endowed with some higher moral qualities, spiritual qualities, self-restraint, yamas, niyamas, etc. One type, and who do only good things for the world. They do only good things. They speak only for the good of others. According to Patanjali system, they are called Prakriti Leena Purushas. They have reversed the journey. They have reached the source of evolution, Prakriti. How do we distinguish them from the opposite? There are also people with special powers who have done a lot of damage to themselves and the rest of the world. There are aberrations. Actually, it happens, Why do these aberrations occur? I can give you an example. Many people can practice terrible austerities, can work very hard with great discipline, great sense of purpose, great strong determination, but they do only harm themselves and harm others. So those people are the negative examples. But the positive examples are Prakriti Leena Purushas. Great men and women who have done only good things for themselves and the rest of the world. Many epoch makers belong to that. So the point is, this is an example of this reverse evolution, the Prakriti Leena Purushas. People of great spiritual seekers who have travelled a long distance in spiritual journey in this reverse evolution, but still they have not fully liberated. Sometimes they call videha, sometimes called. They can be reborn again as human beings, and they still display these extraordinary powers. But they will use only this power. They will use only for good, not for bad. Why? Because they already practiced yamas, niyamas, all these self-restraint, all these they have practiced. They practiced dharana, dhyana, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and then samprajnata samadhi, but they have not fully attained liberation. So they have to continue these karmic cycles. They are called Prakriti Leena Purushas, which we are going to discuss in the 19th Sutras and later on. So this is one evolution. So an important point to remember. The others are aberrations, people with extraordinary powers. Mostly their powers only lead to their downfall. That's an important point to remember. You can find many people, many scourges of humanity, world history. Extraordinary powers of mind, ability to think, act, do. But they have done enormous damage to themselves and to others. These are aberrations. That's why there are commentators who insist on one important idea. Any exercise with the mind should be undertaken only after one is fully established in yamas and niyamas. That's an important point, remember. Pratyahara can be practiced by many people. See, there you can find people with extraordinary powers, but not very good people, not necessarily very wonderful. They are not good examples, but they have tremendous power to withdraw their mind away from things and concentrate on one area, and can focus with tremendous mental power. They can focus and achieve great things. But the net result in which they have done only harm to others. Why? Because yamas and niyamas are absent. That's the idea behind. But the Pragadilina Purushas are those who are fully established in yamas and niyamas. Asana, pranayama, pratyahara. Asana doesn't mean hatha yoga, please. Asana here means the ability to sit for a long time with steadiness in one place for practicing meditation, dharana, dhyana, etc. That is the meaning of sthira sukham asana, etc. So the higher human beings you can see in every age. So that must be the implication of what Patanjali is talking about. Otherwise, as I mentioned earlier, there will be a wide gap between what Patanjali is talking about and what we are witnessing in our world. We don't find anybody, any Videha, any Pragadilina Purushas coming around. We don't see them actually. But we read in my mythological books in Puranas. But some commentators have hinted that these Pragadilina Purushas are Adhikarika Purushas, means some great authentic superhuman beings, supermen, superwomen, who are born from time to time doing good for the world, but they are not fully liberated, because if they are fully liberated, they won't be born again and again. That's the idea behind. I think we can have interaction. Of course, I shall little more, I may discuss this particular sutra. Okay, now as I mentioned earlier, the two parts of this sutra should be understood. One is Virama Pratyabhyasa Purvaha, the other is Samskara Sesha. Virama Pratyabhyasa Purva means this particular higher Asamprajnata Samadhi, the highest transcendental Samadhi, which helps you to transcend all samskaras, all negativities, is preceded by the practice of total cessation of all vrittis. Samskara Sesha means when you reach that stage, you actually transcend all vrittis and samskaras. Sesha means it looks like that, but it is not there. Like a burnt seed, dagdha bija nyaya is a technical term used. It's a metaphor, it's a way of example, analogy. The analogy is, as I mentioned earlier, the burned seed analogy. It is there, but it's not going to sprout, it's not going to have any effect. And that is the characteristic of this Asamprajnata Samadhi, this higher Samadhi. Perhaps I may read one important part from Swami Vivekananda's complete works. But Swamiji has thrown some additional light on some of these ideas in his explanation of the 18th Sutra. Swamiji makes this point clear, so I can read that. According to Sankhya philosophy, there is no God, as I mentioned, So, remember, today, if you go to a bookstore and buy a book on Sankhya philosophy, if you are going for a Sanskrit text, which is an authentic text, what you are going to buy is most likely Sankhya Karika, which is an important book by Ishvara Krishna, actually, that's the name. Now, in that book, the idea of God is not completely negated. But the reason is, that is the only original source book that is now available in Sankhya system. The original exponent of Sankhya system was Kapila, who must have lived a few thousands of years before Ishvara Krishna. Ishvara Krishna's time may be around 3rd century, 4th century AD. So Kapila was the original exponent of Sankhya philosophy. That Kapila did not accept the reality of a personal God. So that's why Swamiji says that according to Sankhya philosophy, there is no God. It says that there can be no God of this universe, because if there were one, he must be a soul, and the soul must be either bound or free. How can the soul that is bound by nature or controlled by nature create? So that's the idea behind. So, and then if it itself is a slave. On the other hand, why should the soul that is free create and manipulate all these things? It has no desire, so it cannot have any need to create. So that's a logic Swamiji is using here. So again, remember, this is not Vedanta. This is Swamiji's input, his attempt to explain some positions of Sankhya philosophy. We should be very careful when we read Vivekananda's literature, as any book for the matter. I have often confronted problems here, something very funny. In Shankaracharya's commentary, it's a world of books. It's a lifetime effort to study Shankaracharya's books, which he completely finished writing before he was 12 years old. So today you find, if you go to India, old men, maybe in their 80s, 70s, who must have been studying for 50 years in the whole lifetime, still struggling with Shankaracharya's commentary. And all the books they are trying to study were written by a boy who had not finished his maybe primary school. So that's something very funny. Now in that book, he brings in different arguments from different schools of philosophy. So he wants to write about debate. So first he will clearly state the views of the opponents, the other philosophers, whose views here he finds some problems with, like for materialists and so on. So people without reading, without understanding this, they will be reading some pages on Shankara's Bhashyas. Actually, they will be reading the argument of the opposing party. Without realizing this, you know what they do? This is what Shankara says. Something very funny, See, you find Shankaracharya is actually presenting certain views that he finds serious problems with, which he just cannot agree with. But to explain that, he should first of all present the views that he is going to refute. But people who don't have the time to read even a single book completely, they will turn to one page, and unfortunately for Shankaracharya, it is a page in which he is actually describing the opposite view. And they will quote, this is what Shankara says. So remember, here in this book, Swamiji is actually talking about the position of Sankhyas with regard to God. That's an important thing to remember. So Swamiji, it has, secondly, it says the theory of God is an unnecessary one. Nature explains everything. That's again a Sankhya view. Because Sankhya's will tell you that nature, if you look at nature and if you analyze this evolutionary process in nature, you can find a complete description, explanation of the mystery of creation. So that's what Swamiji is trying to make clear here. Now we can have interaction. You are most welcome to ask questions. Thank you very much.
I had one question.
Yeah.
Prasava, reverse evolution, is that the same as what is involved in the kosha abhyasa of Taittiriya Upanishad, going backwards in the koshas?
Really. If you can, they say the Panchakosha Vichara, once, but Anandamaya Kosha is not equal to Atman. Anandamaya Kosha is closest to Atman, but not the same as Atman. But if you can start your journey through this Panchakosha. I mean, you can put Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya. All these four koshas can be, you de-identify with. You de-identify. Normally we identify also with Annamaya kosha, material, or Pranamaya kosha, the energy, the Manomaya kosha, we identify also with the mental level, Vijnanamaya kosha, the intellectual level. Beyond that, there is Anandamaya kosha. But Anandamaya Kosha is only, it is closest to Atman, it is not Atman itself. So it can be, in fact, it is mentioned as an example in the Vitarka, Vitarka, Vichara, Asmita, Ananda, you find it. So, in some commentators' writings, they consider the Panchakosha Vichara as equivalent to this Vitarka, Vichara, Asmita, Ananda, etc. Which again will take you to the Sampragnata Samadhi, actually. Through first Vashigara Vairagya, that is Apara Vairagya, then through these disciplines you can reach Sampragnata Samadhi. That's the idea behind.
Well, in the Vitarka you said is reasoning. In the Sutra is Vitarka Bhadane Pratipaksha Bhavana.
Oh, that is different. Oh, yeah. That okay. There is that context is different. What it means, Vitarka Bhavana, Pratipaksha Bhavana means when our mind, when we find it difficult to cross the barrier. See, a very greedy person.
What's the way of reasoning?
Yeah, you're struggling. You find, let's say, greedy person. He wants to get out of this greed, but he cannot. Then you should think of the problems brought out by greed, by this incessant quest for money, the worship of success, profit. A person who is angry, he wants to get out of anger. He can think of the terrible consequences of anger. So Pratipaksha Bhavanam helps you to blunt the edge of what you want to transcend. That is different here. Here Vitarka has a definite meaning here. Through reason. Yeah. With the Pratipaksha Bhavanam is a tool that you use to get out of a difficulty. That's the idea. Even modern psychology also, they say that you should think of the problems of
contracting force.
Yeah. Of course, yeah.
This one.
Yeah, thank you.
Pranam.
Namaskar.
Vitarka, Vichara, Ananda, Asmita.
Yeah.
In Swamiji's commentary, Swamiji mentions Vitarka has counterpart Savitarka, Nirvitarka, Savichara, Nirvichara.
Yeah.
After that, Sananda, Sasmita, they don't have any counterparts. Could you please comment on that?
Okay. Now, of course, I normally thinking because Swamiji's books easy to learn, it's in English, so I normally do not go through Swamiji's books completely, but I can explain. So, you want me to explain this? I can read. Now, this part of yoga is based entirely on Sankhya philosophy, about which I have already told you, etc. As you will remember, egoism and will and mind have common basis, the chitta, the mind stuff, etc. And then, beyond that is the Purusha, the essence of intelligence. Knowledge is power, and as soon as we begin to know a thing, we get power over it. So, also when the mind begins to meditate on different elements, it gains power over them. That sort of meditation where the external gross elements are objects is called Savitarka. So, when the internal subtle elements is called Nirvitarka. That's the idea behind it. So Vitarka means questioning. Savitarka with questioning the elements as it is called Savitarka. When it is turned to subtle or sukshma, it is called Nirvitarka. That's what Swamiji is implying here. And then it goes to, and again in the very same meditation, when one struggles to take elements out of time and space and think of them as they are, it is called Nirvitarka. Anything that you meditate And by meditating, you focus on that object itself minus the time and space. So anything that you can focus on without the time-space combination, then it becomes sukshma. It is called nirvitarka. So, for example, Pancha, Swamiji mentioned here, Pancha Mahabhudas and Pancha Tanmatras. Tat Matra means when you think of fire as Pancha Mahabhudas, then that fire is something that you can see and feel and experience. If you show your hand, you feel the heat. When you can see with your eyes and so on. But if you can think of that fire principle, not fire, but fire principle, which means you detach it from its external dimension and you focus on its sukshma internal dimension, then it becomes tanmatras. That's why, remember, vitarka is reasoning, vichara is a discerning mind. The vitarka itself, at the savitarka level, it is the sthula, and in the nirvitarka level, it is sukshma. So, in the vitarka itself, you evolve from savitarka to nirvitarka. So, that's the idea behind. Similarly, savichara, nirvichara, etc. In all these aspects, there is the sthula and there is the sukshma. When anything that you concentrate upon with a form and with a space, and then of course there are other aspects, a causation and other paraphernalia behind and before it. It's all gross, sthula. The same object, if we can focus on, without time and space and causation. I mean, anything which has a time and space, you have to think of who is behind, what is the cause for it, what is the cause, and what does it create, and whose cause it is, and whose effect it is. So, once you detach this time, space, cause equation, from this it becomes sukshma. That's what Swamiji is talking about. Swamiji bringing different aspects from Sankhya philosophy to explain this. You don't find many of these ideas in the yoga system, but Swamiji is explaining. That's why his writings are more, it makes a lot of sense. It made a lot of sense in those days. It is not exclusively on yoga alone. He brings in a lot of Vedanta and a lot of Sankhya also to make it more sensible. If you read Yoga Sutras by themselves, we often find a disconnect, a distance. That's why I often mention Yoga Sutras can be properly understood by giving the Sankhya philosophical background and also by pointing out its limitation in comparison to Vedanta. So, when we discuss the Pragadilina Purushas and Videhas, so the same category, we will discuss that subject. It comes in the coming sutras.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Pranam Maharaj.
Yeah, come on, please.
Maharaj, I am still of Vedanta, or could you go over them for me?
Yeah. Okay. Maybe you will, I shall explain now, but you can also refer to Viveka Chudamani, which is a slightly bigger book, and the early pages you find this clearly mentioned. But now I shall try to explain. Now, there are 7 disciplines which are very important from the point of view of Advaita Vedanta. But there are 4 disciplines which are very universal, very general for all spiritual seekers. Together, there are 7. So I shall try to explain. The first 4 together is called Sadhana Chadushtayam, means 4 means, 4 methods. These are very universal, very important and very relevant for all spiritual seekers and in fact for all students of philosophy. In Sanskrit, I shall first try to explain, then in English also. Nitya Anitya Vastu Vekaha, Ika Amutra Phalabhoga Viragaha, Samadhi Shatka Sampatti, Mumukshuttam. These are the 4 disciplines. First one is Nitya Anitya Vastu Viveka. That's the first one. Nitya means the real, the capital letter R. Things which are absolutely real. From a philosophical spiritual point of view, you may think spiritual values are real, God is real, like that. Even from an ordinary empirical perspective, there are certain things in life which we consider to be real, maybe more real in comparison to certain other things. In normal human interactions, normal life, you can see. It's very important. For example, if you have lost your passport, hopefully it won't happen. And if you have lost maybe a $5 bill, you will think the passport is real. You won't care whether you get back your $5 bill or not, let us say. So even in everyday interactions, there is this real unreal equation is happening in our everyday life. It's an important point to remember. So from the standpoint of Vedanta, the first thing that is necessary for every student of Vedanta is he should first of all know what is real. And then he should know what is unreal. And then he should stick to the real. He should uphold the real and he should disregard the unreal. So that's called Nitya Anitya Vastu Veka, proper discerning wisdom discrimination between the real and the unreal. In Vedanta, Atma is real, Brahma Satyam. That is the real. Brahman or Atman is real. Everything else is unreal. Unreal doesn't mean non-existent. Compared to the real, the other one is relatively unreal. And that is an important point to remember. In English books, when you read world is unreal, actually it can be terribly misleading. Vedanta never tells you this world is unreal. Absolutely crazy. In fact, in Brahma Sutra Bhashya, there are long passages where Shankaracharya refutes the Mahayana Buddhist view, the Vijnanavadin school, which tells that this empirical phenomenal world is unreal. The world of objects is unreal. That's one view. In the Mahayana Buddha philosophy, there are 2 levels of Mahayana Buddhism. There's subjective idealism. One is called Alaya Vijnanavada, the other is called Pravritti Vijnanavada. According to the previous school of Alaya Vijnanavada, one permanent subject is there, but all other things which come and go, they are unreal. But there is a platform on which all this appear and disappear. Then there is another school, Pravritti Vijnanavada, which is later school of Vijnanavada. It was attributed to Dignaga, who lived sometime maybe in the 5th century, 6th century AD. According to Dignaga, everything in this world is unreal. So the question, if everything is unreal, there will be somebody who realizes the unreality of the so-called unreal. You know, the world unreal is, it should be witnessed, experienced. The unreality itself is something that could only be understood against the background of something which is real. Remember, it's an important thing to remember. So, the very idea of unreal makes sense only against the background of something which is not unreal, which means which is real. So Shankaracharya refutes, and Shankaracharya says, this world as such that we see, it is not absolutely unreal. As the Vijnanavadins say, it is real. This is an important point, remember. So, and then he gives some funny examples. You have eaten lunch. Can you say, no, I did not have my lunch? You have seen a pot in front of you. Can you say, no, I didn't see a pot? And he gives example, In fact, in this way, actually he takes example eating food. You are hungry, you eaten now, have wonderful lunch. And no, I was not hungry, I didn't eat. You cannot say that. So Shankaracharya gives this example and he says, you cannot say that. In other words, Shankaracharya doesn't say that these empirical experiences or objects are unreal. What he says is they are not absolutely real. And what is absolutely real? Something which remains the same in the past, present and future, without a change, which will be the same experience or the same in the in waking state, deep sleep state and dream state, Jagra, Swapna, Sushupti, remain the same. So that is the real meaning of it. So this understanding is the first stage. Second stage is, again, after understanding what is real, Atman, God, you can say. In popular religious philosophy, when I talk to people who may not be fully comfortable with Advaita, I would say, in popular religious culture, God is real, the only absolute reality. Everything else is coming and going. So, in the sense, compared to the absolute reality, it is unreal. Next one is, you should hold fast to the real and disregard the unreal. Third discipline is this. Samadhi, Shakka, Sampatti. Samadhi, Shakka, Sampatti. Samadhama, Uparadi, Tidiksha, Siddha, Samadha. The 6 disciplines means self-restraint, restraining the senses, restraining the mind, concentrating on one supreme subject. All these are certain disciplines that automatically will come to a person when he upholds the reality, the real. Third discipline, self-restraint, sense control, etc. Concentration, etc. Fourth discipline is mumukshutvam, that is strong urge, desire, the spiritual enlightenment, for liberation, for spiritual enlightenment. So that means 4 disciplines are, first of all, is discerning wisdom to understand what is real and what is unreal. Then uphold the real and disregard the unreal, renounce the unreal. Then self-restraint, mind control, sense control, concentration, a sense of sanctity and sacredness, Shraddha, etc. Fourth discipline is mumukshutvam, strong desire, urge for liberation, spiritual enlightenment. These are 4 disciplines. So again, there are 3 other disciplines that are special to Advaita. Let us say for more serious spiritual seekers. Sravanam, Mananam, Nididhyasram. These are the 3. Sravanam means listening, reading, understanding, by hearing the right message, the right, the truth. When you read a book, when you listen, actually what is happening is you are feeding your mind with the great spiritual thoughts and ideas. First stage. Second stage, but you should listen or you should study. Sravanam literally means listening. But in modern times, we should understand it in a more comprehensive sense. So Sravanam could mean by imbibing, by reading, by hearing, like that. And then focusing, contemplating on the meaning of what we hear, or what we study, what we have imbibed. Second discipline, that is mananam. Third discipline is nididhyasanam, which means deeply meditating through concentration, realizing it. These are 7 disciplines. Of which the 4 disciplines that I mentioned first, sadhana, chatushtaya, means 4 fundamental disciplines, are very universal, very important, very relevant for any serious spiritual seeker.
Thank you for taking the time to explain that.
Thank you. So you just read Viveka Chudamani. Sravanam, Mananam, Nidhyasanam will not be mentioned in the context of the other 4. But that's what is clearly stated in the rest of the book. Let us say 7 disciplines together constitute. But the first 4 ones are very important. That is the real, unreal, the discerning wisdom, the upholding the real and disregarding, renouncing the unreal. Then self-restraint, restraining the mind, restraining the senses, then developing a reverence, a sense of sanctity and sacredness for the statements of books and teachers, and then the ability to concentrate. Fourth one is an urge for spiritual liberation. And some teachers who have commented upon Viveka Chudamani will tell you that even if you are little, maybe you don't have all the qualifications, still a strong urge, a strong sense of quest, search for one's own spiritual liberation, spiritual enlightenment itself can automatically bring in other qualifications.
Is Swami Prabhupananda's version of Viveka Chudamani sufficient?
Certainly. Yeah, please read. You know, Prabhupananda ji has made a very simple, very readable translation, very wonderful.
Thank you.
Right? When you explain, I have to explain more than what is written in a book. When you read it, you can understand more easily, because printed words will become clear if you read again with this recording.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Hari Om Maharaj.
Hari.
Maharaj, one question is, so while developing a reverence for incidents such as Buddha's renunciation, which you were talking about a little earlier today, do we stand the risk of premature renunciation? Like someone who is not prepared or detached enough, renouncing and then burning out while trying to practice?
No, that's true. Actually, Swami Vivekananda, in some of his writings, Raj Yoga, he actually refers to this problem, really speaking. It's a very important subject actually raised. Swamiji is speaking about, he was a great student of history. People who have taught, people who didn't reach the level through proper method, especially without going through the fundamental disciplines, gradual disciplines, suddenly get some great idea and then you get inspired. It has created a lot of problems in this world. Swamiji, historically, he talks about some religious movements which suddenly arose with great energy and great power, military and economic power. And all they claimed they were inspired by some teachings. Actually, and Vivekananda says one important proof whether a person who claims to be inspired or not is, does that person tell you that it is something that he got and you cannot get it? Then it is inherently irrational. It's a very great statement in Vivekananda. What he says is, real spiritual experience, real spiritual enlightenment is something universal. It is possible for everyone. So it's something like, it's like science, so to speak. If Einstein says that what he discovered is all right for him, but others it is not relevant. It's not science. Nobody will admit him, nobody will agree that what he said is true. So it's just pure science. Vivekananda makes a very profound statement. Remember, he said all this 120, 30 years back. And you can imagine the history of modern times. So, true spirituality is very transparent and very objective, very scientific and very reasonable. The greatest upholder of reasoning was Shankaracharya. He used to shout like a slogan, not a political slogan, spiritual philosophical slogan. Sutya, yuktya, swanubhutya. You know what it means? First you listen, you read the books, the scriptures, or whatever it is. Then he says, use your brain, use your own wisdom, your own intelligence. Yuktya, yukti means logic, logical reasoning. And then he says that's not enough. Then you should bring it to your own experience. If you use your reasoning properly, in an intelligent way, then you get an intuitive idea whether it works for you or not. You may not be able to experience it. In order to be convinced of the truth of Advaita, you need not necessarily be somebody with an experience. That is the ultimate goal. But if you have a pure mind and pure sense of logic, then you cannot help being convinced of the truth of what you are studying. That's why Shankaracharya says, read it, but don't blindly believe it, just because somebody says. And Vivekananda actually repeats that in modern times. Don't believe because somebody says. Use your reasoning, your own reasoning power. Shankaracharya is yuktya, sutya, by reading, then using your own intelligence, your own reasoning power, and then swanubhutya. Swanubhuti means one's own experience. So that very much that should appeal to any scientific mind in modern times. That's something very interesting.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Question on YouTube by Dr. Jyoti Lulla.
Yeah.
How can one meditate just on I am with no visualization?
Now one should not do that kind of meditation at the beginning. Actually, the question, even an intellectual question like this arises because we sometimes believe we can start with that. No. So one, at the beginning of our spiritual life, one should read scriptures, one should have a what is called ishta, one's own spiritual ideal to contemplate on, to meditate upon, and that is the only way. Not only that it is wrong, but it is even dangerous. I am Brahman, like that, if somebody meditates at the beginning, there is also a real problem which I want to mention. There is a possibility of people losing their mental balance. If somebody who has not done a lot of spiritual disciplines begins his spiritual life, spiritual journey by meditating on Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, I am God, and things like that, there is even a danger in that. Psychological problem is there. So before undertaking any such things, one should be prepared. It may take, maybe you'll be disappointed if I tell you it takes several life cycles to reach that level of spiritual fitness. See, look at Ramana Maharshi. I often give this example because his books are available now. Now Ramana Maharshi, what happened to him? His father died, and that this man was here, now he's not there, where did he go? In fact, that whole trauma actually took him to that Tiruvannamalai, and then he went to the temple, and of course then he sat. That's the beginning of his spiritual journey. But really speaking, Vedanta tells you, Vedantic perspective tells you that he must have practiced a lot of spiritual disciplines sometimes in his previous life cycles. Otherwise, the death of a person doesn't mean anything to you in a philosophical or spiritual sense. This is an important thing. How can the death of his father become a turning point in his life, in his philosophy? It doesn't happen. That kind of philosophical perspective, it's not common, it doesn't happen in one life cycle. So that's why we should always begin our spiritual journey at the Saguna level. An idea of Ishta, an idea of a God or absolute reality, and then one should follow the rules and disciplines slowly, and then only the I am God or I am Brahman, those things one should never even. You can study, you can be steeped in Vedanta literature. That's very good actually. Even if you don't realize Brahman, it's a pretty distant goal, remote goal. Reading about Vedanta books, actually, it purifies our mind, It takes our mind away from the world of senses. It keeps the mind somewhere in a higher plane, really speaking. That's good. That is helpful even when we are working in the office, even when we are worshipping God. But in meditation and contemplation, one should not try to jump into the Advaitic ideal immediately. It is not only wrong, but it's positively risky from a psychological point of view, because our mind may go vacuum. When the mind goes vacuum, at that time, delusions can occur. Not for everyone, but it could happen. In Patanjali himself, Bhranti Darsana, one of the 9 obstacles, Antarayas, he mentions that. So it's very important. Thank you.
I think we are done now.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful Q&A. Very, 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 very much appreciated, especially the questioners. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.